Okay, this is part 2 of our Humanities 101, Chapter 12 on cinema video, going through our chapter in the book, and where we are now is on page 312. And we're talking a little bit here about the camera point of view. We mentioned it a while ago, but this is kind of going into it just a little bit more deeply and how that affects your vision in it, what you see, the zooming, and the effect. It says, people move before us the way they move before the camera, but the camera or cameras, bottom of 312, can achieve visual things that the unaided eye cannot. For example, showing the same moving action from a number of points of view at the same time. You can see something. Sometimes it's better going and watching, it's like seeing the what am I trying to say, the football game on TV. You see a lot more things up close than you can when you go and attend in a live stadium. You only have your one perspective from your seat, and usually that's pretty far away, and you can't see close-ups of the football players or the coaches unless they shoot them up on the screen for you, right? Then even if you're close by to the side, you only see what's right in front of you kind of close up, and you don't get that whole field vision of the whole stadium or the whole field. You don't get that bird's eye view. And so that's what it's talking about here. There's just something that the camera brings to our experience that we would never be able to achieve personally, even if we were present. And that's really cool. And it can get different effects and things like slow motion or stop motion that we also can't, achieve in real life. So it's bigger than life, and sometimes the experience is better. That's what art brings to it that real life can't. All right, the next thing that the chapter discusses is violence and film, and you actually have this as a discussion option in the discussion board on the perception key, page 316, number 2, about the use of violence and how it reveals the morality of the age, comparing it to Shakespeare's plays. So, and you get a little bit of a chance to kind of talk about your philosophy on that. It does, violence is part of films because violence is part of real life. Some of them emphasize it, and then it's really a matter of what do they decide to show, okay? And of course they can't really, they're not, supposed to be documenting real live violence. It's the representation of violence. It can be there to shock the audience. It can be implied. It can be very graphic. But for example, this is so horrible, but it talks about an old film, and it's in another language. In 1928, shows the razoring of a woman's eyeball. Well, it's not really the woman's eyeball. It's a dead cow. But we, go into that willing suspension of disbelief, and we react as if it were her eyeball. There's a difference between using it narratively to tell a story, because that's part of the story, versus for entertainment, and people have different boundaries on that, what they're okay with, what they're not, what they feel like is acceptable. And it just really doesn't go into that ethic in your chapter, but there's some that are there that's just a built-in part of it. You get a war film and so forth, and violence is just part of that experience. Sometimes it's there though for entertainment and laughing, comedy and whatever. And people, different people have different views on whether that's all right or not, since it's not really real. So it's just a little bit of part of your chapter there, not a big part. Then the introduction of sound and how that really changed film. It's hard to really imagine film without the marriage, as it says on page 318, of sight and sound. And then it even talks about for example, just take a video that you have, a DVD, and turn the sound off. And just watch it a little bit and see how that's affected. Like the same scene without the background music, much less the dialogue, has a different impact. Sometimes it's not as scary. It's just not, it's just incomplete. And even though you're not always aware of the background noise or the music, whatever, it affects your experience, and it has a lot to do with it. You have, I think one of the assignments, the assignment for this unit gives you some options in the sight and sound department. And because some of them take more time than others, I'm letting you choose 2 of them. Some of them are kind of short to kind of look at that. But the historical thing is that sound was first introduced in Al Jolson's film The Jazz Singer in 1927. And it says not everyone welcomed it, page 316. Actually, the musical The Sound of Music, kind of plays some of its background subject matter is this transition from the silent movies to the movies with sound, and how some of the actors and actresses who were quite popular when there was no sound didn't do so well when they were called upon to speak, where we could hear them and sing. And that's, hence the sound of music, the experience that brought. So it really changed things, and not everybody was that excited about it. I can't imagine really enjoying a movie without, sound. That's just so much part of the experience now. All right, to summarize 318 to 323, they're very short little sections. They do talk more about the interaction of image and action and sight and sound. And then they use, this example film, which probably none of us have seen, but in Fellini's 8.5 and Mastroianni's film with Guido. But it talks about how it abandoned a continuous narrative structure in form of episodic streams of consciousness, which is a little different, and that may be hard to understand without watching some of it. But a narrative structure is just the story flows right along. And if you've ever watched a film that kind of backtracks and doesn't always go sequentially, kind of flashbacks, you can think a little bit more of episodic streams of consciousness, but they're coming from his mind. So as he remembers and recalls something, it backtracks. You might be more accustomed to that now. It just was more unusual and just started back there with those films. So they're kind of noting key films in film history as they changed how things were done. Film structures, they use a couple examples here. The Deer Hunter, who says what would seem to be serious structural problems because there's 3 different locations for the film, at this basically going back and forth sequentially between them and not sequentially. Robert De Niro was in this. This is back in 1979. Before most of our time, but it has 3 large sections: sequences of life in Pennsylvania at a wedding, war, and then after, and they just aren't all, they were kind of brought together in the movie. So sometimes the film structure combines these different locations in the different episodes. On page 320, the more familiar structure is the episodic structure that's narrative, and the example they use is the famous Thelma and Louise movie, and they use a lot of cross-cutting with that. It said the editing is quite conventional, but everybody remembers this particular scene where they blow up the truck because of the use of cross-cutting. So that creates some tension. So you maybe can find a clip of that on YouTube, the gasoline rig scene, to kind of see a good example of cross-cutting. The last example they give, they talk about the use of montage, as I mentioned in the previous video from Hitchcock, and the shower and murder scene. Now there's a film that came out a couple years ago called Hitchcock, and if this interests you at all, he talks about, and his character talks about how they went about to do this scene. They had never done anything like it. All the movie people were really nervous about the depiction of the horror and the violence, and how the first time people saw the shower murder scene, they were horrified. People were running out of the theater, but they liked it too. And it didn't even show any blood. It didn't show her. It showed blood on the floor of the shower. You saw the knife. You saw the jabbing. The screeching music all came together. And it was just through a montage, a collection of those different scenes I just showed you, or just talked about, that created this famous scene. And he showed how the montage could increase tension and terror without, you never see the knife have contact with her body. But the effect was so great. The last little section here, let's see, we have cinematic significance, and this isn't about what you might think, in terms of awards, but how the meaning. The meaning that is constructed throughout this whole section, if you read it, it talks about the meaning. The meaning is embodied in the moving images. The scene has a strong tension and impact, but the full meaning depends on the context of the whole film. So significance has to do with kind of getting the meaning, and it's not just that surface narrative, some depth of meaning. If you understand with literature symbolism and the depth, of meaning through symbols and so forth, it's talking about how it achieves that. Sometimes it is symbolic, like the gesture they mention, that's loaded with meaning, but sometimes it's the collage, the collection of images together. So it is very complex to analyze and study, but there's a lot of reward for it if you go through and know what you're looking for and you watch it multiple times and see the skillful, they say, photography and editing, what you see in addition to what is actually said. The last part is on this page is the context of film history, and that's where the little Hitchcock interview. I don't think I'm gonna have time to. Yeah, I'll do it here real quick. He's going to talk about. Here, we're going to see this real quick because I don't have it on the other thing. About technique and how important it is. This is Alfred Hitchcock right there. Okay, so I think you get the idea. It's really cool, him kind of explaining there what, as an artist, he's emphasizing technique. Let me get back to my PowerPoint and finish up here with The Godfather. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. And there's way more here than I can discuss in a couple of minutes. But your book talks about the narrative structure and the storyline, so that you don't have to see the whole thing. And then the use of images and how he uses harsh lighting. You can kind of see this in the example still image on page 324 and the close-up on Al Pacino and his character's the son, Michael Corleone. Famously, Marlon Brando played the father, Vito. But there is a clip I think we just have time for to see the use of sound, and it is kind of graphic, and it is balancing out the use of the sound of the baptism, where Michael is saying, yes, I'm going to reject evil, even while the whole murder of his gangster enemies are being carried out at his order. I don't know why the little visual ups are on there at the same time. It's a little graphic. Ugh. Now the use of sound here is the fact that they're playing the church music and you hear the church things going on even while the murders are going on, to help you understand that they're carried out at the same time. And it says in here, it underscores his hypocrisy, because he's saying, yeah, I reject evil, and yet he's carrying out evil. Anyway, that's where we're going to have to stop.